Most people at age 71 are downsizing, not Jean-Jacques Savin. Instead, he decided to seal himself inside a barrel and cast himself off into the Atlantic Ocean. Just a man drifting alone for thousands of kilometers through storms, shipping lanes, and pitch-black nights inside a homemade capsule the size of a garden shed. But for Jean-Jacques, that wasn't even the wild. This time, he'd row solo across the Atlantic. Because Jean-Jacques spent his life chasing the thrill of the unknown, and in his mind, this wasn't madness, it was living. He said that he wanted to prove that age is just a number, but this time, things didn't go the way he planned. Jean-Jacques Savin had always been drawn to the edge of cliffs, the edge of maps, the edge of what people thought a man his age should be doing. Long before he sealed himself into a barrel and floated out to the Atlantic, he was already chasing chaos in one form or another. He was born in southwestern France, and his father was this really successful oyster farmer. School barely held Jean-Jacques' attention, but the ocean, well, that was a lifelong obsession. He spent more time in the water than in the classroom. He was always dreaming of these far-off places. And his need for risk came early. As a teenager, he once climbed the local church bell tower, not by the stairs, but by scaling the lightning rod. He had no harness, there was no audience, just a wild kid clinging to metal hundreds of feet in the air. And it wouldn't be the last time he tested gravity. In his 20s, he joined the French army and became a paratrooper, leaping out of planes. But the military wasn't enough for him. When his service ended, he didn't settle into a career, he spiraled outward. He became a pilot, a park ranger, gold prospector, even a sailor. He flew small planes across Europe. He lived in the Central African Republic, protecting wildlife in one of the most remote corners of the continent. He spent time alone in the savannah, watching storms roll in from the horizon, and would watch elephants and other wildlife as they moved through the grasses. He said it was the first time he truly understood what it meant to be alone, and he liked it. That job gave him a taste for solitude and danger that he could never shake. And most of all, it gave him what made him feel most alive. He said, "These professions gave me a taste for risk and adventure." Back in France, he would fix boats, rebuilt roads with crushed oyster shells. He harvested cordgrass from the windblown dunes. He liked working with his hands, and he liked getting dirty, but most of all, he liked anything that kept him moving and active. He lived aboard a sailboat for years, crossing the Atlantic not once, but 4 times. For most people, that would be a bucket list item, but for Jean-Jacques, it was just another Tuesday. But even that wasn't enough. At 65, he decided to swim the Arcachon Bay near where he grew up. It's 16 kilometers or about 10 miles of wading through mudflats, dodging jellyfish, and fighting unpredictable tides. 5 years later, for his 70th birthday, he did it again. This time he doubled the distance, and it was nearly 9 hours nonstop. When people asked him why he did it, he just smiled and said, "Why not?" That same year, he climbed Mont Blanc, Europe's highest peak at over 4,800 meters or over 15,000 feet. And it's not just a casual hike or climb. Even the easy route takes a couple days and involves crampons, ice axes, and going into thin air. For a 70-year-old, it's no joke, but Jean-Jacques trained methodically. And he didn't talk about the climb as a conquest. He saw it as just another test for him. And he just kept pushing. He entered triathlons, endurance races, and anything that would put him shoulder to shoulder with people half his age. In one race, he even placed second in the 70-plus category. But it was never about medals. It was about motion and challenge, the thrill of pushing back against gravity, against boredom, and against the slow creep of age. And by this time, he was looking for his next wild idea. And he came up with a plan so strange, it sounded like a joke. But for Jean-Jacques, it was perfect. He would build a barrel, climb inside, and let the ocean carry him thousands of kilometers across the Atlantic. No sail, no engine, just him and the sea. He'd already crossed the Atlantic 4 times sailing, but now he wanted something stranger, something riskier. He wanted to drift like a castaway, alone and at the mercy of the sea. And that idea didn't come out of nowhere. It actually started decades earlier with another Frenchman. In 1952, a biologist named Alain Bombard set off to prove a radical theory that a person could survive a shipwreck and drift across the ocean with no food, no water, and no help. And naturally, most people thought he was insane, because who does that? Who wants to willingly do that? But Bombard wasn't even a sailor. He knew next to nothing about navigation, but he believed in science and he believed in his gut. So he built a tiny inflatable raft, barely bigger than a bathtub, and launched from the Canary Islands with only a sextant, a knife, and one sealed bottle of water that he swore he'd never touch. For food, he strained plankton through a net, hoping that it had just enough vitamin C to keep scurvy from making yet another guest appearance in one of my stories. Because if there's one thing I've learned in these stories, is that scurvy always finds a way. So watch out for scurvy, people. So he also ate raw fish, squeezed them for their juices, and drank the rain and saved it when it came. He was scorched under the sun. He lost nearly 55 pounds, hallucinated, and still refused rescue. 65 days later, his raft hit the shore in Barbados. He drifted 4,400 kilometers or 2,700 miles, which is unbelievable, in a little dinghy. And when he returned to France, people didn't know whether to call him a genius or a lunatic. He called it a voluntary shipwreck, and he wrote a book about the experience called The Voluntary Castaway. It became a cult classic in France, especially for people who felt trapped by modern life, by routine, comfort, and safety. And one of those people was Jean-Jacques Savin. He was super fired up by the book and said that it thrilled him, and it soon became a dream of his. One line in the book in particular caught his attention, and that was, "A barrel set afloat off the Canaries takes 3 months to reach the Caribbean." It was just kind of a passing remark in the book, but to Jean-Jacques, it sounded like a dare and a dream. He thought, what would it feel like to surrender completely? To let go of the rudder, the wheel, and the illusion of control. Now, he'd spent his life chasing danger with the skydiving, the gold prospecting, crossing mountains and oceans by sail and on foot, but this was totally different. It wasn't about mastering risk, it was about giving into it. So in 2017, at 71 years old, he got to work. He would build the barrel and let the sea decide where it went. So he started with just some rough sketches with scraps of paper covered in notes about ballast and buoyancy. And soon the idea stopped feeling like a joke and started looking real. He brought in local craftsmen and marine engineers to help shape the barrel into something that could actually survive the open ocean. They built it in a workshop in his hometown, this bright orange capsule made of marine-grade plywood, layered with resin and fiberglass until it gleamed like a buoy. It was 3 meters or about 10 feet long, 2 meters or about 6.5 feet wide, and weighed about 450 kilograms, almost 1,000 pounds. The front was slightly pointed to slice through the waves, and the back was rounded so it could roll and right itself if he capsized. Inside the bow, they stuffed these dense foam blocks to absorb the impact from rogue waves or floating debris, and the bottom was weighted with lead plates and ballast tanks to keep it upright. Kind of like those wobble toys that bounce back no matter how hard you hit them. And inside, it was pretty tight on space. There was just enough room for a fold-down bunk, a gas stove, shelves packed with over 100 days of food, and a small navigation station with his logbook and GPS equipment. He added portholes and packed a couple bottles of wine and some fancy food for when he reached the other side. He had a satellite connection to his team back in France, and it was connected to a GPS device that relayed the weather forecast, wind speed, and direction. He could also get emails, texts, and phone calls. Buzzing with adrenaline and clutching his logbook, slowly drifted away from the pier, straight into 4,800 kilometers or almost 3,000 miles of open ocean. The plan, if you could call it that, was simple. Trust the wind and currents to pull him west toward the Caribbean. Somewhere out there, he figured he'd wash ashore. And that was it. No steering, no support boats shadowing from a distance, no way to control where he went or how fast he got there. And for the first few weeks, it was almost dreamy, he said. He woke with the sun, he brewed coffee on a tiny gas burner, and opened the hatch to watch dolphins playing in his wake. The weather was calm and the sea was kind, and his radio updates to France were full of joy and excitement. He said, "Everything is fine. Spirits are good." He read books about adventure and war. He played bluegrass on his mandolin, wrote pages of notes for a future book, and filled long afternoons with a quiet routine. And when the weather was calm, he would open the top hatch, climb out, and dive into the sea using a small ladder to get back on board. And I couldn't find anything saying that he was actually tethered to the barrel, because that would be my absolute nightmare and terror, would be having that barrel float away from you as you're out there swimming in the sun with fish. My God, that would be terrifying. He was a pretty seasoned sailor, and he knew the waters well, so he likely only did it on calm days, where the barrel didn't float too far away, maybe. I don't know. I would just be hanging onto that barrel nonstop. And sometimes he'd dive underneath the barrel to fish, adding fresh protein to his otherwise canned meals. His world became just a small barrel, and it creaked when the waves lifted it. It groaned in storms. Every object had to be strapped down or it would slam around the cabin. The ocean was his clock and the sun was his compass. The line between day and night, he said, they blurred, and there were moments he didn't know if it was dawn or dusk. But he didn't fight it, he just surrendered to it. He watched the stars zoom across the sky and said they made him feel like he was floating through space. And when the storms did come, he stayed inside, trusting the foam-padded crash zones and the ballast weights to keep him upright. The capsule didn't cut through the waves, it tumbled over them, and it took hits and just rolled. And that's what he called freedom, if you can imagine. He felt very free out there. But freedom comes with risk. One morning, he spotted a massive oil tanker on the horizon heading straight toward him. His bright orange capsule was pretty much invisible in the waves. It was just a tiny speck. So he frantically grabbed the radio and called the ship, and just in time, they veered away. The second time, though, there was no radio contact with the ship. This one appeared far closer, and he scrambled to load a flare and fired it into the sky. Miraculously, someone saw it, and the ship veered off again at the last second, passing just 20 meters, or about 65 feet away. It was close enough to rock the barrel in its wake. And if they had hit him, they wouldn't have even known. There would be no rescue, no record of where it happened, and probably no trace of the barrel. But luck again was on his side. He survived both encounters, but they left him pretty shaken. For the first time, he realized how easily his floating dream could have become a coffin. The trip was supposed to take 90 days, and it took 127. He said that the winds were slower than expected, and the storms hit for 8 nights in a row. The barrel constantly was tumbled around and got thrown around, but it amazingly held together. And then, one spring morning in May 2019, a tanker near the Caribbean spotted something unusual. A little orange capsule, still intact and still bobbing. They towed him to shore, where he emerged bearded, sunburned, and just grinning like crazy. He was so happy and ecstatic that he made it. He raised a bottle of champagne and had a big gulp. Newspapers called him eccentric. Reporters called him crazy. But the world couldn't stop watching him, because who does this? Who just builds a barrel and floats across the ocean in it? But Jean-Jacques didn't care what anyone thought. He said, I'm not traumatized. On the contrary, I'm ready to go again. And that's the thing about people like him, and a lot like the people in the stories I've been covering lately, is that it's just never enough. There's always got to be something next on the horizon. So, like the others, Jean-Jacques was already dreaming of his next voyage. He was supposed to come home after the long journey and just kind of rest for a while. Most people would have just called it a once-in-a-lifetime stunt. Cashed in on the fame, done the talk shows, maybe written a book, and retired with a good story. And he did that for a little bit. The barrel was put on display at a marine museum in France, but Jean-Jacques could not stay still. In late 2019, less than a year after the barrel voyage, he wanted to launch from Lima, Peru, and row all the way to French Polynesia. It would be 6 months alone at sea, twice as long as the Atlantic crossing, and he called it a human and scientific adventure. He tried to get sponsors and wanted to raise money for children's cancer research, but the timing was really bad. The pandemic hit soon after, and the Pacific plan died. But the itch for another ocean adventure didn't. By late 2021, Jean-Jacques was 74 years old and changed his plan from rowing the Pacific to rowing his old friend the Atlantic. And it helped because he knew the trade winds, the currents, and the moods of the sea. By this time, he had a few small sponsors, and along with some personal savings, he was ready to go. He revealed his new vessel, the Audacious. It was a sleek 8-meter or 26-foot ocean rowboat, outfitted with solar panels, desalinators, navigation gear, and emergency beacons. It was designed for endurance, power, speed, and storm survival with self-righting ability in case of a capsize. He would launch from Portugal and aim for the Caribbean, turning 75 at sea. He expected it to take about 3 months, and he told a local reporter that adventure keeps me young. I want to laugh at old age. So he trained hard, rowing daily, preparing meals, testing the desalinators that would turn seawater into drinking water. He partnered with a children's charity, hoping that his voyage could raise awareness and inspiration, not just headlines about him. By December, the boat was ready and at the docks in southern Portugal. Not everyone thought it was a good idea, though. Some friends urged him to reconsider. They said it was too risky, too ambitious for a man pushing 75. Unlike the Barrel, this trip would be a massive physical undertaking. And that would mean rowing solo for 6, 8, 12 hours a day, navigating through storms, with no support team and just being totally out there alone. But he waved off the concern. He'd crossed the Atlantic 5 times already, and he wasn't about to stop now. The sea had tested him 5 times before, and every time it had brought him home. He couldn't imagine it doing anything else. On January 1st, 2022, he launched from Portugal into pretty difficult weather conditions. At first, everything seemed fine. The boat's satellite beacon sent regular signals, and he posted cheerful updates describing himself as strong and calm. But within days, the Atlantic turned on him. Winds picked up, swells grew to 6 meters, he faced crosswinds and breaking waves, and the boat was tossed all over the place. The batteries failed, and the drift anchor snapped. On January 14th, he turned 75, becoming the oldest person to ever attempt rowing the Atlantic. His team posted an update saying, "Embarking on such a challenge at the dawn of your 75th birthday is exceptional. We will accompany you passionately until you succeed." On calm days, he rowed for 8 hours straight. When the seas turned violent, he hunkered down in his cabin, describing it as a washing machine. He joked that he'd replaced his old program of reading and the mandolin playing with the 3 R's: row, refuel, and rest. But fatigue was setting in. He began losing his appetite. The solar charger for his desalinator failed, forcing him to use a manual hand pump to produce fresh water, which is a pretty grueling, time-consuming task. Still, he stayed hopeful. On January 18th, he said that the weather is strong, but this has become a habit. I've completed 60 kilometers toward the Azores. After long thought, I continue this adventure that I think will be exceptional. Dieting my water to the max since I get carried away. All is well, very good mood. But the next day, something changed. He sent a short update to friends. The seas were heavy and his instruments weren't charging properly. Still, his tone remained pretty calm, and he'd faced worse before. But then there was silence. The beacon stopped moving. For nearly 2 days, it drifted erratically off the Azores, a remote island chain in the mid-Atlantic. And then the emergency signals began. 2 distress beacons went off, one triggered manually and the other automatically when submerged. It was the worst-case scenario. His daughter issued a statement saying Jean-Jacques triggered his 2 distress beacons, expressing a situation of very great difficulty. Everything has been implemented with the French, Portuguese, and American rescue services. We are, of course, very worried. And then there was more silence. For nearly a day, the tractor drifted aimlessly off the coast of the Azores. And finally, the next morning, the Portuguese Navy found the boat, floating upside down, and its cabin was crushed and flooded. And there was no sign of Jean-Jacques. The early reports claimed that his body had been found inside, but within a day, those reports were corrected. His daughter later confirmed that he was not found in the boat and has not been recovered. Across France, tributes poured in. Friends called him joyful, relentless, a man who never stopped moving. And some called him the last romantic adventurer. His daughter wrote, "He died doing what he loved. The sea was his home, and she kept him." So no one knows exactly what happened in those final hours. Jean-Jacques already reported 9-meter or almost 30-foot waves, and his solar panels were failing, his strength was fading. Maybe a rogue wave flipped the boat, and maybe debris struck it. Maybe he was outside adjusting something when the sea rose up and claimed him. But all the signs pointed to disaster. And the truth, like the man himself, disappeared into the Atlantic. At 75, Jean-Jacques Savin still believed adventure was worth the risk. He was chasing the feeling of being fully alive, the thing that most of us stop reaching for. And in the end, that might have been the bravest thing of all. So that's the story of Jean-Jacques Savin. Let me know if you would ever take on something so wild at that age. Or any age, as we get older. We're expected almost to stop trying, but when is a reasonable age to stop going on these crazy adventures? Is there any age, or should we just give her right up until the very end, until the bitter end? I always wonder what drives someone to do something that risky as they get older. And I want to know, would you guys ever chase something like that? As much as a cliche it is, he went out doing what he loved, but he really did. He really loved being in the ocean, and if that's the way you got to go, that's the way you got to go. It's definitely sad the way it ended, but, man, the guy just lived life to the fullest right up until the end. And if you like this story and want to support more wild tales like this, there's a lot more coming. I have a spreadsheet that is gigantic about different adventures. And I love to get your input on it on my Patreon and my YouTube membership. I put out polls asking people what kind of videos they want to see. I share the research that I do, share little things that are happening around here. In fact, it is starting to snow right now outside. It is October 20th and no snow on the ground yet. That's exciting. So you'll get to follow, day by day, week by week, the winter as it comes to the Yukon. And boy, it'll be fun. It's going to be cold soon. We're having a nice fall right now. But anyways, yeah, check out the Patreon and YouTube memberships, both in the description below. And also, if you want to wear your adventure with pride, I've got lots of Adventures Gone Wrong merch up at the store, adventuresgonewrong.com. Hoodies, all different colors, t-shirts. I got to put other stuff in there too. I just haven't had time. But if there's anything you want to see, let me know. My favorite are the dog bowls. The puppy loves, that's his new bowls, the drinking bowl and the food bowl. So, from my cabin to wherever you are, stay curious, chase something ridiculous once in a while, not too crazy though. Go at your own pace, and I'll catch you in the next one. Back in France, he fixed boats, he rebuilt